Indirect talks between the U.S. and Iran have concluded in Oman. Both sides continue to seek an agreement on Iran's nuclear program. But the U.S., of course, has increased its military presence in the Middle East as tensions escalate between Washington and Tehran. Let's go to Arman Mahmoudian, research fellow at the Global and National Security Institute, to talk some more about this. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you for inviting me, Marla.
Are you at all hopeful that the talks will bring about something concrete?
It's very hard to say, and to be honest, the circumstances for a deal or reaching a mutual understanding is not necessarily the best, because Iran is entering this negotiation at its most vulnerable stage. Iranian, both domestically and foreign, regionally, are vulnerable, are weak. They've been weakened by the aftermath of the Israelis' attack on Iran's proxy networks, by the Israeli and American attack against Iran's defense and nuclear facility in June war, and then the protests. And when a country enters a negotiation with such circumstances, they usually are demanded or required to make the most concession and compromise. And at least that's the speculation about how the United States or what the United States wants out of this negotiation. But the problem over here is that things that the United States is asking or may ask, including the halting Iran's enrichment program permanently, is going to be very hard for the Islamic Republican regime in Tehran to forego. We have to keep in mind Ayatollah Khamenei, the supreme leader of Iran, has turned the matter of the enrichment of the uranium and, generally speaking, the nuclear project as not part of only his regime identity, but as its own identity. As in the last 3 decades, he's been emphasizing this is an absolute right, non-negotiable right, and Iran must have it, Iran shall have it, and Iran will have it. So compromising and making a concession that forgoes from such a program would come at a great deal of political cost and political capital for him personally and for the establishment.
Okay. Let's talk about whether you see even room for some sort of concession on nuclear. You mentioned perhaps they won't go to the point of saying we will cap what we have and not go any further. But would they be willing to take at least a step back?
I think there are things that the Iranians are willing to make compromise. I think right now they are willing to make a compromise on the matter of the enriched uraniums. Iran has about 400 kilograms of highly enriched uraniums, over 60% enriched uraniums, that during the June war, neither Israelis or Americans, either out of the willingness or capacity, couldn't demolish that. So that exists, and that can be materialized toward the military program quickly. And Americans have been very clear that they want that uranium out of Iran. I think Iranians are willing to make that compromise. They may will to send that unenriched uranium to Russia or China outside of their territory, and they hold it under the consortium. On the matter of enrichment itself in Iran, Iran doesn't have any active enrichment right now because the war kind of dismantled it. That's at least what the Iranian foreign ministry approved, that confirmed they don't have any active enrichment, but they have a couple of thousands of the centrifuges here and there that has not been assembled or entered to the enrichment centers prior to the war that can be used, and they have the knowledge to build further. So I think what Iranian can do is to make not necessarily a written agreement, but a promise or reach a mutual understanding that they will withhold from restoring their enrichment program temporarily, not permanently, or they will have their enrichment outside of Iran, in Russia or in one of the Arab states of the Persian Gulf under the mutual consortium. These kind of solution has been proposed, but we never seen them, either of the sides, go through it or follow through it very seriously. But this time seems to be very different for both of them.
Okay. What about missiles? Would they be more open to having some sort of concession on missiles?
That's a very good question. And I think that's the most critical stage right now, because the issue of missile is actually much more severe than the issue of the nuclear matter, at least in my view, because the nuclear project of Iran never been materialized to the extent that can be used for Iran's military capability, either defensive or offensive. Iran never had a nuclear arsenal. But the missiles have been proven since at least the previous war that they are primarily tool of Iran's defense and offensive military capability. Look, in the June war, Iranian proxies didn't take much of a role. Iranian Navy didn't take much of a role. This Iranian so-called cyber offensive campaign didn't take much of a role. It was Iran's missiles that were kind of the pioneer or frontier of the Iran response and retaliatory campaign. So imposing limits on that from Tehran's perspective would accepting to undermine their own defensive or retaliatory capability, which makes them even further vulnerable to further military strikes. But what they can do is that instead of putting a restriction on the ballistic missiles or, reducing their ballistic arsenal, I think Iran is willing to make a compromise or concession on putting a halt on the scope and the range of the ballistic missiles. In past, the Iranians were very careful to not build or not at least display any ballistic missiles that can go beyond the medium range. But yesterday, they displayed or they showed a new missile, the Khorramshahr 4, which they call it the long range, but we have to wait and see. But one thing that Iranian can do is that, they can make this concession that we will put a halt on the range of our missile. We won't build any missile that can go more than 2,500 kilometers. Is it something acceptable for the United States or not? That's a different story. But I think that's the extent of the compromise that Tehran at least is willing to go with it.
Got it. Okay. We do have to leave it there, Arman, but thank you for joining us. Arman Mahmoudian is a research fellow at the Global and National Security Institute.